This is the most important commodity in the world. If you don't understand the power of oil, you'll never really understand how the global economy works, or the global balance of power. Wars have been fought over oil, governments overthrown for it, and our entire geopolitical world order is shaped around it. And right now, as the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran, and more broadly across the Middle East, continues to unfold, oil is once again sitting right at the centre of it. And the reason oil matters so much to governments around the world is because oil isn't just any commodity. It's the thing that quietly powers the entire global economy and almost every part of your life. Yet, we all know way too little about it, and only few can imagine the huge effect a spike in oil prices will have on our lives. Whatever you think of oil, you probably underestimate its effect on the economy and the current world order. So in this video, I'm going to take you through everything you need to know about oil, from what it actually is to the petrodollar system and how it has shaped the current world order. We'll also look at what the current oil crisis means for our everyday lives today and what past oil shocks can teach us about where things might be heading next. Okay, but before we get into the complicated stuff, let's start at the very beginning with a very simple question. What actually is oil? Oil is basically made from plants, bacteria, and microscopic plankton, which basically are tiny creatures that died millions of years ago. As time went by, their remains settled on ocean floors, got covered by sediment, and through millions of years of heat and pressure, these dead plants, bacteria, and plankton were turned into the oil that everyone is so obsessed with. Oil isn't distributed evenly. It concentrates in some areas of the world. This chart ranks oil reserves by country. As you can see, over 17% of the world's oil reserves are concentrated in Venezuela, and almost 12% are in Iran. Coincidentally, this aligns pretty well with this year's US foreign policy that so far has featured the capture of Venezuelan President Maduro in January, as well as the rather aggressive military operations in Iran. I'll leave the interpretation up to you. Anyway, as we can see, a lot of oil is concentrated in Middle Eastern countries. All the Middle Eastern countries together sit on 48% of the world's oil reserves. And it should come as no surprise that a lot of US military operations have taken place in the Middle East over the last couple of decades. But speaking of the US, you might have heard that they are currently the largest producer of oil. And that is true. Even if the US don't nearly have enough oil reserves to compete with Middle Eastern countries, they have become really good at drilling oil in recent years through something called fracking. But this likely won't go on forever, because oil is finite, and once it's out of the ground, it doesn't grow back. So naturally, having larger oil reserves is quite beneficial. But we're going to talk more about the oil reserves of different countries, as well as fracking, later on. Because before we talk about drilling, fracking, or oil reserves, we need to define what we actually mean when we talk about oil. Because a lot of the time, we hear all kinds of words around oil, like gas, petrol, gasoline, LNG, LPG, and people muddle all of these together or use them interchangeably. But there are actually quite big differences between these, and we need to understand these different products if we really want to make sense of the oil economy. So let's start with oil. Crude oil is the stuff I was talking about before. It's the millions of year old stuff that sits below the Earth's surface. The plants, bacteria, and microscopic plankton that sit under layers of rock and which were transformed by millions of years of heat and pressure and turned into this dark liquid. This is crude oil. Crude means it is unrefined and not yet processed. And in this state, crude oil isn't really useful. But this is the liquid we're talking about when we talk about the oil price. It's in this state that oil gets sold in barrels. This is the raw commodity that gets traded on global markets and sets the price for everything else. But in order to use this liquid, it needs to be refined into different products, like petrol, or as Americans say, gasoline. This is the stuff that goes in your car. Diesel, jet fuel, asphalt for roads, or petrochemicals are other uses for crude oil. And oil is not just used for transport. It's literally used in all kinds of things like plastic, medicine, pesticides for agriculture, clothing, and so much more stuff. Okay, so now that you have a rough idea of what oil is, let's take a brief detour to look at gas, because gas is sometimes used short for gasoline. And gasoline is the word Americans use for petrol, the stuff you put in your car. But the word gas is also used for natural gas, which is a completely different thing. Natural gas is also a fossil fuel, formed deep underground from decomposed organic matter over millions of years. But it's different than oil. It consists mostly of methane and is used globally for heating, electricity generation, and industrial processes. It is often found alongside crude oil. But unlike oil, you can't just put it in a barrel and ship it off. That's because it's a gas. To transport it, you have to cool it down to minus 162 degrees Celsius or minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit, so it becomes a liquid. And that is liquid natural gas, often referred to as LNG. And it's transported on these giant ships called LNG tankers that are basically huge freezers that keep the gas liquid. So we've covered oil, gas, petrol, gasoline, and LNG. Now there's only LPG left, which stands for liquefied petroleum gas, which is a byproduct of crude oil and natural gas. LPG refers to highly flammable hydrocarbon gases like propane or butane, the stuff people use to power the grill when they have a barbecue. But in huge parts of Asia, LPG is what regular people cook with. Because while Western countries built extensive underground natural gas pipelines during their peak urbanization periods in the 20th century, this was just skipped in many Asian cities because these urbanized so rapidly that building underground gas networks was often just overlooked. LPG is a lot more flexible as it is transported in portable cylinders. So in many parts of Asia, it simply became the everyday solution for kitchens and restaurants. Okay, so now that you have an idea of what all of these different fossil fuel products are, you probably understand why everyone is so bloody obsessed with them. Cooking and transport just are a really important part of life. And by transport, we're not just talking about you and me taking our car to go grocery shopping. Transport impacts everything. It's how food gets to the supermarket and transported over different countries.